Welcome to Mr. Chalk's Revision Tips.
When answering exam questions, there are a few key things to remember, right? So just remember, exam technique is a key part in preparation for any exams, and it's something that you'll pick up the more you go and you do past papers. Right, so many questions in exams are repeats of what will be in old exams. So going and looking at lots of generic questions beforehand is a good idea. When going and answering and questions and reading them, there's a few things just take into account. Make sure you go read the question at least twice so you don't make any mistakes when you're reading them. As you're reading them, go highlight key information. Don't make assumptions about what the question is asking. Make sure after you've answered it, you go check your work for daft errors that you might make. And if it involves going and answering something where there's some calculation, make sure that you write your workings out down. Right, let's go and have a look at the question.
Before we can go and look at how to investigate things or ways of going and looking at rate of reaction, we just need to go and consider a few different bits and bobs. So it's worth noting that the rate of reaction is primarily determined by the frequency of successful collisions between the reactants or the reacting particles. There are a number of things that can go and alter this. So temperature, concentration and pressure can all go and alter these things, as well as using a catalyst. Lots of these questions have something to do with collision theory. So remember, collision theory is basically talking about the conditions and what's needed for particles to go and react. So it's the fact that particles must collide with each other and particles must have enough energy in order for them to react. They also need to be in the correct orientation to react. Right, so if we go and look at a few ways of investigating rate of reaction, right, the first way is going and looking for colour change. Quite often this is done in questions where they talk about reacting sodium thiosulfate with hydrochloric acid. So make sure that you actually go and talk about the fact that you're measuring things out using a measuring cylinder, and talk about the physical quantities of sodium thiosulfate and acid that you're using. In this case, because we're looking for colour change, make sure you're talking about the fact that you're going to put your flask on a black cross. Then talk about the fact that what you're going to react together. So we're reacting sodium thiosulfate with hydrochloric acid. If you are doing this reaction, you need to mention the fact that you're going to swirl it to start off with as well. So then you're looking down through the reaction, you start the stop clock. When it starts, you stop it where you can no longer see that black cross. And in that way, you can go and see how fast the reaction is happening. So you might also go and record other things like temperature change or things like that. Then don't forget, when you're answering it, talk about repeating it with different, if you're doing it with concentrations or temperatures or whatever. Right, the second way that we can go and look at rate of reaction is by measuring the amount of gas. So one way to do this is by going and using an inverted measuring cylinder in a water bath. So you'd set it up same as before. You go, make sure that you're talking about the actual reaction that you're going to go and carry out. So in this case, it would be reacting calcium carbonate with an acid. React it for a certain amount of time. It's important to say the amount of time you're reacting it for. And then you record the volume of gas that's being produced. Same again, go repeat it another 2 times, which will allow you to get an average, which will improve accuracy. Another way that we can do this is exactly the same as before, apart from we can go and use a gas syringe. Right, so if we were reacting acid with magnesium, make sure you're talking about the physical equipment that you're going to use, react them together. Then we're going to go and use a gas syringe instead of an inverted measuring cylinder. Remember, a gas syringe will be more precise because it measures things in smaller divisions. So, looking at this question, so student investigated the rate of reaction between magnesium and dilute sulfuric hydrofluoric acid. The student used the apparatus used in figure 1. So if it's talking about that apparatus being there, then in your answer you will need to talk about that physical apparatus. Right, so if you're looking at outlining a plan to investigate the rate of reaction, then you don't need to go into like a vast quantity of detail, but make sure you go and look at how many marks the question is worth. It wants you to describe how you would do the investigation, and most importantly the measurements that you would make. Describe how you would make it a fair test, so that's talking about things like control factors. And it talks about not needing to go and talk about safety precautions, so don't go and waste time during the exam talking about things that you're not going to get marks for. So you could talk about removing the bung from the flask and adding the magnesium, because that's talking about the procedure. Talking about starting the stop clock or stopwatch. You need to measure the volumes of gas produced at various time intervals, right? Because that will allow you to produce a nice graph. Talk about repeating it with different concentrations of acid. Talk about the fact that you're going to go and record the volume of gas produced, and you're controlling the volume of acid each time, so you're using the same amount of acid. You could talk about the fact that you're going to control the initial temperature of the acid, because the temperature will affect the rate of reaction. And finally, you can talk about controlling the mass or the length of something of the physical magnesium, because that will also need to stay the same each time, as all you want to do is change the concentration of the acid. So hopefully you have found that useful. If you've got any questions, then drop it in the comments below, and we'll be uploading a lot more. Right, good luck folks.